David sat in his small apartment staring at the divorce papers on his coffee table. His marriage had ended 6 months ago, and he was still trying to figure out where it all went wrong. It wasn't a messy divorce, no fighting, no drama. Just two people who realized they had been living like roommates for the past 3 years. "We just don't connect anymore," his ex-wife had said during their last real conversation. She wasn't wrong. They had stopped really talking to each other somewhere along the way. Their conversations became about bills, schedules, and whose turn it was to take out the trash. At 32, David felt like he had tried everything. Online dating, blind dates set up by friends, meeting people at bars and social events. Every relationship seemed to follow the same pattern. The excitement at the beginning, the hope that this time would be different, then the slow realization that something important was missing. He worked as a financial advisor at a small firm downtown. Every day he helped people plan for their future, retirement savings, college funds, investment portfolios. He was good at his job because he understood numbers and planning. But when it came to his own future, especially when it came to love, he felt completely lost. The thing that bothered him most was watching his clients who had been married for decades. There was something different about the way they looked at each other, even after 20 or 30 years together. They would sit in his office discussing their financial goals, and he could see a kind of partnership that went deeper than just sharing expenses and household chores. One couple in particular stuck in his mind. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson had been married for 43 years. During their meeting last month, Mrs. Thompson had mentioned that her husband still brought her coffee in bed every morning, even though his arthritis made it painful to carry the tray upstairs. "Why do you still do that?" David had asked Mr. Thompson. The old man had smiled and said, "Because I love seeing her face when she wakes up. That little smile she gives me when she sees the coffee, that's worth a little joint pain." David realized he had never experienced anything like that. He had never loved someone so much that their happiness became more important than his own comfort. And more importantly, no one had ever loved him that way either. His dating history was full of relationships that looked good on paper but felt empty inside. There was the lawyer who was smart and successful but only talked about work. The teacher who was sweet but had no real interest beyond binge-watching TV shows. The marketing executive who was fun and attractive but seemed to care more about taking perfect Instagram photos than having real conversations. None of these relationships had been bad, exactly. The women were all nice people. But David was starting to realize that nice wasn't enough. There had to be something more, something deeper that connected two people in a way that lasted through decades of ordinary days and difficult challenges. He started thinking about what made the difference. What did couples like the Thompsons have that he had never found? He began paying more attention to the long-married couples he worked with, watching how they interacted with each other and with other people. He noticed that these couples seemed to genuinely care about each other's well-being. When Mr. Garcia talked about his wife's volunteer work at the animal shelter, his pride was obvious. When Mrs. Park mentioned her husband's struggle with high blood pressure, her concern was real and deep. But it was more than just caring about each other. These couples also seemed to share something else, a way of treating other people that showed their true character. They were patient with the receptionist when she made mistakes. They remembered details about David's life and asked about his family. They said please and thank you, not just to be polite, but because they actually meant it. David started to wonder if the problem with his past relationships wasn't just that he hadn't found the right person, but that he hadn't been looking for the right things. He had focused on attraction, shared interests, and compatibility. But maybe he should have been looking for character. His grandmother used to tell him stories about how she met his grandfather during World War II. She was working as a nurse, and he was a soldier who had been wounded in battle. She always said that what made her fall in love with him wasn't his good looks or his sense of humor, although he had both. It was watching how he treated the other wounded soldiers in the hospital. He shared his cigarettes with the men who didn't have any, she would say. He helped the ones who couldn't write letters home. He never complained, even when he was in pain. I knew that a man who was kind and brave when things were difficult would be someone I could count on for the rest of my life. They had been married for 58 years before his grandfather passed away. Even at the end, when he was sick and confused, he would still try to hold her hand and tell her she was beautiful. David realized that he had never really looked for kindness and courage in the women he dated. He had looked for fun and chemistry and shared interests, but he had never asked himself, how does this person treat others when no one is watching? How do they handle difficult situations? Do they have the kind of character that would make them a good partner for 50 years, not just 50 dates? He decided to change his approach. Instead of actively dating, he would spend more time observing people. He would look for examples of real kindness and genuine courage in his daily life. If the kind of love his grandparents had shared really existed, he would learn to recognize it when he saw it. This decision brought him a strange sense of peace. Instead of feeling pressure to find someone quickly, he could take time to understand what he was really looking for. He could learn to see past the surface and notice the qualities that actually mattered. David didn't know if this new approach would lead him to love, but he knew it was better than repeating the same patterns that had left him feeling empty. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful about the future. Maybe true love wasn't a fairy tale after all. Maybe it was just something that required him to look with different eyes. He folded up the divorce papers and put them in a drawer. That chapter of his life was over. It was time to start a new one, and this time he would pay attention to what really mattered. 3 weeks after making his resolution to observe people differently, David discovered his new morning routine. There was a small coffee shop called Sunrise Cafe just 2 blocks from his office building. It wasn't fancy, just a few worn tables, mismatched chairs, and the smell of fresh coffee beans that made you feel at home immediately. He started stopping there every morning around 7:30, ordering the same thing, a medium coffee with cream and a blueberry muffin. The timing was perfect because it gave him 15 minutes to sit quietly before work, watching the regular customers and thinking about his new approach to life. That's when he first noticed her. She came in every morning at exactly 7:40, always wearing scrubs and sometimes blue, sometimes green, occasionally pink with small cartoon characters on them. She was probably in her late 20s with shoulder-length brown hair that she usually kept pulled back in a simple ponytail. What struck David immediately wasn't her appearance, though she was certainly pretty. It was something else entirely. She moved through the world differently than most people. While everyone else seemed rushed and distracted, checking their phones or looking impatient in line, she seemed present in every moment. When she ordered her coffee, she actually looked at the barista and smiled. Not the quick, polite smile most customers gave, but a genuine smile that reached her eyes. David watched her interactions with fascination. When the elderly man in front of her struggled to count out exact change, she waited patiently without checking her phone or sighing. When he dropped a quarter and couldn't bend down to get it, she immediately picked it up for him and handed it back with a warm, "Here you go." "Thank you, dear," the old man had said. "These old hands don't work like they used to." "No problem at all," she replied. "I hope you have a wonderful day." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. She wasn't just being polite. She actually seemed to care about this stranger's day going well. David learned from overhearing conversations that she worked at Children's Medical Center, the big hospital about 10 minutes away. That explained the cartoon characters on some of her scrubs. It also explained something else he noticed about her. She had the kind of gentle strength that came from dealing with difficult situations every day. One morning, a young mother came in with a crying toddler and a baby in a stroller. The woman looked exhausted and overwhelmed, trying to order coffee while bouncing the crying child and managing the stroller. Other customers were giving her annoyed looks, clearly impatient with the noise and delay, but the woman in scrubs, David still didn't know her name, immediately stepped over to help. She didn't just offer assistance. She naturally started making funny faces at the crying toddler while talking to the mother. "Rough morning?" she asked with understanding in her voice. "The worst," the mother replied. "The baby was up all night and now Tommy here is having a meltdown because I told him he couldn't have candy for breakfast." "Well, Tommy," she said to the toddler, "I think you're very smart to want candy for breakfast. I want candy for breakfast too sometimes, but maybe we can find someday." "Hing else that's almost as good." She helped the mother order, suggested a child-friendly snack from the pastry case, and even held the baby for a moment so the mother could pay. Within 5 minutes, the toddler had stopped crying and was giggling at the silly song she was quietly singing. "You're amazing with kids," the mother said gratefully. "Are you a teacher?" "I'm a nurse at the children's hospital," she replied. "I get lots of practice with little ones." After they left, David noticed that several other customers thanked her for helping calm the situation. She seemed genuinely surprised by their gratitude, as if she couldn't understand why helping someone would be noteworthy. David started timing his visits to observe her more, though he tried to be subtle about it. He told himself he was conducting research on human kindness, but the truth was more complicated. He found himself looking forward to these glimpses into how she treated other people. She remembered details about the regular customers. She asked the college student about his finals. She inquired about the construction worker's injured back. She knew that the retired teacher liked her coffee extra hot, and that the businessman preferred almond milk on Fridays. But it was more than just remembering facts. She seemed to genuinely care about these small details of other people's lives. When the college student mentioned he had failed a test, she looked truly concerned and encouraged him not to give up. When the construction worker said his back was feeling better, her smile was as bright as if she had received good news about her own family. David began to understand what his grandmother had meant about character. This woman's kindness wasn't something she put on like a costume. It seemed to be part of who she was at the deepest level. His opportunity to actually talk to her came on a Thursday morning, when he was running late for an important client meeting. He had rushed into the coffee shop, grabbed his usual order, and was hurrying out when disaster struck. The handle of his briefcase broke, and papers scattered everywhere: financial reports, client files, and his presentation notes for the 9 o'clock meeting. Before he could even start gathering them up, she was on her knees beside him collecting the scattered documents. "Oh no, that's the worst timing," she said, carefully stacking the papers. "These look important." "They are," David said, feeling embarrassed. "I have a presentation in 20 minutes and half of it just flew across the floor." "Well, let's get you organized then," she replied, continuing to gather papers with quick efficiency. "Is this presentation order important?" Her calm competence was exactly what he needed in that moment of panic. Together they sorted the papers back into order, and she even spotted a page that had slid under another table. "There," she said, standing up and brushing dust off her scrubs. "Crisis averted." "Thank you so much," David said. "I'm David, by the way. I see you here every morning, but I've never properly introduced myself." "I'm Lisa," she replied, shaking his hand. "And yes, I've noticed you too. You always sit at the corner table and actually seem to enjoy just sitting and thinking. That's rare these days." Her observation surprised him. He hadn't realized she had noticed him at all. "I like watching people," he admitted. "There's something peaceful about this place in the morning." "I know what you mean," Lisa said. "It's like a little pocket of calm before the day gets crazy." They talked for a few more minutes about the coffee shop, the neighborhood, and their jobs. Lisa mentioned that she loved working with children, even though it could be emotionally challenging. David talked about helping people plan for their futures, though he didn't mention his recent focus on observing human character. When David finally looked at his watch, he realized he was going to be cutting it close for his meeting. "I should run," he said, "but thank you again. You really saved me." "Anytime," Lisa replied. "Good luck with your presentation." As David hurried to his office, he realized something had shifted. His morning routine wasn't just about observation anymore. For the first time in months, he was genuinely curious about getting to know someone better. And that someone was a woman whose kindness seemed as natural as breathing. 3 weeks had passed since David and Lisa's first real conversation. Their morning interactions had become the highlight of his day. They would chat about simple things: the weather, weekend plans, funny stories from their jobs. Lisa told him about the brave kids she worked with at the hospital, and David shared stories about helping families plan for college savings and retirement dreams. But David still hadn't asked her out. He kept telling himself he was still observing, still learning what real character looked like. The truth was, he was nervous. Lisa seemed so genuinely good, so naturally kind to everyone around her. He wasn't sure if someone like her would be interested in someone like him. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a busy Friday around 8 o'clock. The coffee shop was packed with the usual crowd: office workers grabbing their caffeine fix, students with laptops, and regulars settling in for their morning routine. David was sitting at his corner table, reading the news on his phone while waiting for Lisa to arrive. The bell above the door chimed, but instead of Lisa, A man walked in who made everyone in the shop immediately uncomfortable. He was obviously homeless. His clothes were dirty and torn, his hair was long and matted, and he carried a worn backpack that looked like it held everything he owned. But what made people most uneasy was the way he was talking to himself, having what seemed like an argument with someone who wasn't there. The conversations in the shop died down. People stopped looking up from their phones and newspapers. The college students at the big table gathered their things and left quickly. Even the friendly businessman who usually chatted with everyone suddenly became very interested in his morning paper. David watched the man approach the counter. He was probably in his 50s with weathered skin that spoke of years living outdoors. Up close, David could see old scars on his hands and a military tattoo on his forearm that had faded with age. "Excuse me," the man said to the teenage barista, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I haven't eaten in 2 days. I'm not asking for free food, but I have $2.37. Is there anything I could get for that?" The barista looked uncomfortable and glanced toward the manager's office. The man continued talking, partly to the barista and partly to himself. "I just need to get to the VA hospital," he said. "They have my appointment today, but I missed the bus and I don't have money for another one. If I could just get something small to eat, maybe I could walk there. It's only about 5 miles. David could feel the tension in the room rising. Several customers were pointedly not looking in the man's direction. One woman gathered her purse closer to her body and moved to a table farther away. The manager, a stern-looking man in his 40s, started walking toward the counter with a look that suggested he was about to ask the homeless man to leave. That's when the bell chimed again, and Lisa walked in. She took in the scene immediately. The uncomfortable customers, the nervous barista, the manager approaching with obvious intent to remove the homeless man. But instead of hesitating or looking away like everyone else, she walked directly toward the man. "Good morning," she said to him, her voice clear and warm. "I couldn't help but overhear. Did you say you're trying to get to the VA hospital?" The man turned to look at her, and David saw surprise and confusion in his eyes, as if he couldn't believe someone was actually speaking to him kindly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice becoming steadier. "I have an appointment at 10 o'clock. It's important, they're adjusting my medication. But I missed my bus and I can't afford another ticket." "What branch did you serve in?" Lisa asked, and David was amazed at how naturally she spoke to him, as if this was a perfectly normal conversation between two people. "Army," the man replied, standing up a little straighter. "2 tours in Afghanistan. I was a medic." "A medic," Lisa repeated with genuine respect. "That must have been incredibly difficult work." "Thank you for your service," the man's eyes filled with tears. "No one said that to me in a long time." David watched, frozen in his seat, as Lisa turned to the barista. "Could we get him a large coffee and one of those breakfast sandwiches, and maybe a muffin for later?" She handed over a $20 bill. "And whatever he wants to drink for the road." But she didn't stop there. While the barista prepared the order, Lisa continued talking to the veteran. "What's your name?" she asked. "Robert," he replied. "But everyone used to call me Doc because of the medic thing." "Well, Doc," Lisa said, "I'm Lisa and I'm a nurse. We're kind of in the same business, taking care of people. Listen, I'm heading to work at the children's hospital, but it's right next to the VA. Would you like a ride?" David saw several customers' mouths drop open. A few people looked at Lisa as if she was crazy. Didn't she know it might be dangerous to offer a ride to a homeless stranger? Didn't she realize he might have mental health issues or addiction problems? But Lisa seemed completely unbothered by what anyone else thought. She was focused entirely on Robert, treating him with the same respect and kindness she showed everyone else. "I don't want to be any trouble," Robert said, his voice breaking slightly. "It's no trouble at all," Lisa replied. "I drive past there every day anyway. You can help me figure out which radio station to listen to." The manager, who had been approaching to handle what he clearly saw as a problem, stopped in his tracks. He seemed as stunned as everyone else by Lisa's reaction. Robert's order was ready, and Lisa helped him carry it to a small table by the window. David watched them sit down together, and he could see Lisa listening intently as Robert talked. She wasn't just being polite, she was genuinely interested in what he had to say. David could catch pieces of their conversation. Robert was telling her about his time in Afghanistan, about the soldiers he had treated, about coming home and struggling to adjust. Lisa nodded and asked thoughtful questions. When Robert mentioned having nightmares, she didn't look uncomfortable or change the subject. Instead, she talked about the counseling services at the VA and encouraged him to ask about them during his appointment. "The doctors there are really good," she said, "and there's no shame in needing help. You spent years taking care of other people in impossible situations. It makes perfect sense that you'd need some support now." After about 10 minutes, Lisa stood up. "Ready to go? I need to be at work in 20 minutes, but we have plenty of time." As they headed toward the door, Robert turned back to the coffee shop full of people who had been staring at him with discomfort and fear. "Thank you all for your kindness," he said with dignity, nodding to the room in general. David felt shame wash over him. Robert was thanking everyone for kindness, when only one person in that entire room had shown him any. He watched through the window as Lisa and Robert walked to her car, talking like old friends. She opened the passenger door for him and made sure he was comfortable before getting in on the driver's side. David sat there long after they drove away, his coffee growing cold in front of him. He realized he had just witnessed something extraordinary. While everyone else in that coffee shop, including himself, had seen a problem to be avoided or a situation to be uncomfortable about, Lisa had seen a fellow human being who needed help. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't worried about what people would think, hadn't concerned herself with potential risks. She had simply seen someone in need and responded with natural kindness and courage. David understood that this was what he had been looking for his entire adult life. David couldn't concentrate on work that day. During his morning client meeting about retirement planning, his mind kept drifting back to the coffee shop scene. While Mrs. Patterson discussed her investment goals, David found himself thinking about the way Lisa had looked at Robert, not with pity or discomfort, but with genuine respect and interest. "Mr. David, are you feeling all right?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "You seem distracted today." "I'm sorry," David replied, forcing himself to focus. "Just had something unexpected happen this morning. Let's talk about your portfolio allocation." But even as he discussed mutual funds and risk tolerance, part of his mind was still processing what he had witnessed. He had seen dozens of small acts of kindness from Lisa over the past few weeks, but this morning was different. This wasn't just being polite to a barista or helping someone pick up dropped papers. This was courage. Lisa had looked at a situation that made everyone else uncomfortable and chose to step forward instead of stepping back. She had seen past Robert's appearance and circumstances to recognize his humanity, and she had done it so naturally, as if there was no other possible response. During his lunch break, David found himself walking past the children's hospital where Lisa worked. He didn't plan to go in. He just wanted to think about what kind of person chose to spend their days caring for sick children. It took a special kind of strength to face other people's pain and fear every day, and still maintain the gentle optimism he saw in Lisa. As he stood across the street looking at the building, he remembered something his grandmother had told him years ago. "David," she had said, "when you meet the right person, you won't have to guess whether they're good for you. Their character will show itself in how they treat people who can't do anything for them." Robert couldn't do anything for Lisa. He couldn't help her career, couldn't offer her anything in return, couldn't even guarantee that he was completely safe to be around. But she had helped him anyway, not because of what she might get from it, but because it was simply the right thing to do. David realized that in all his past relationships, he had focused on what the other person could give him. Fun conversations, shared interests, physical attraction, social connections. He had been thinking about love like a transaction, what he could get in exchange for what he was offering. But watching Lisa with Robert, he understood that real love might be something entirely different. It might be about caring so much about another person's well-being that their needs became as important as your own needs. It might be about having such strong character that you could be trusted to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. The next morning, David arrived at the coffee shop with nervous energy. He wanted to see Lisa again to talk to her about what had happened, but he wasn't sure how to bring it up. What if she thought he was weird for paying so much attention to her interactions with other people? When Lisa walked in at her usual time, she looked tired but smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, David," she said, sitting down at his table without being asked. This was new. Usually they just chatted while she waited for her order. "Good morning," he replied. "How are you doing? You look like you had a long night." "We had a really sick little girl come in yesterday evening," Lisa said, rubbing her eyes. "I stayed late to help her family get settled. Sometimes the hardest part of my job isn't the medical stuff. It's helping parents cope with their fear." David was struck again by her natural compassion. Even when she was tired from working overtime, she was thinking about other people's emotional needs. "That must be emotionally exhausting," he said. "Sometimes," Lisa agreed. "But it's also why I love what I do. When you can help a scared child feel a little bit braver, or when you can give parents hope during their worst moment. There's nothing else like that feeling." David gathered his courage. "Can I ask you something? Yesterday morning with Robert, how did you know it was safe to help him?" Lisa looked puzzled. "Safe? I mean offering to drive him to the hospital. A lot of people would have been worried about getting involved with a stranger, especially someone who seemed to be struggling with mental health issues." Lisa was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I guess I wasn't really thinking about safety," she finally said. "I was thinking about the fact that he was a veteran who served his country, and now he was hungry and couldn't get to his medical appointment. The risk to me seemed pretty small compared to what he was facing. But what if he had been dangerous?" David pressed. "Then I would have dealt with that if it happened," Lisa said simply. "But you know what I've learned from working with people who are struggling? Most of the time, when someone is acting strangely or aggressively, they're scared or in pain or both. Robert wasn't dangerous, he was desperate. There's a big difference." David felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't just kindness, this was wisdom. Lisa had the emotional intelligence to read people accurately, and the courage to act on what she saw. "You're not like most people," he said quietly. Lisa laughed, but not in a dismissive way. "I think most people are kinder than they get credit for. They just need someone to go first sometimes. Yesterday, once I started talking to Robert, I saw other people relax a little. The barista started being friendlier. The manager didn't kick him out. Sometimes people just need to see that it's okay to be decent to each other." David stared at her, amazed. She had turned a room full of uncomfortable strangers into witnesses to human kindness, and she didn't even seem to realize the impact she had made. "Do you want to have dinner with me sometime?" The words came out of his mouth before he had fully decided to say them. Lisa smiled, the genuine warm smile he had been watching for weeks. "I was wondering when you were going to ask," she said. "Yes, I'd like that very much." David felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by nervousness. "Really? Really," Lisa confirmed. "I've enjoyed our conversations. You're thoughtful and you actually listen when people talk. That's rarer than you might think." As they exchanged phone numbers and made plans for Saturday evening, David realized something profound had happened. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't asking someone out because he was attracted to them or because he thought they might be fun to spend time with. He was asking Lisa out because he had witnessed her character under pressure, and he wanted to know what it would be like to build something real with someone whose values matched the kind of person he wanted to become. He thought about Robert, probably at the VA right now getting the help he needed, because one person had chosen courage over comfort. And he thought about his grandmother, who had recognized true character in his grandfather all those years ago. Maybe this was how real love started, not with butterflies and excitement, but with respect and recognition. Maybe it began when you saw someone's true character and realized you wanted to spend your life learning from their example. Walking to work that morning, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine hope about the future. Their first day. She was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. David had been nervous all day, changing clothes twice and arriving 15 minutes early. But when Lisa walked in wearing a simple blue dress and the same genuine smile he had grown to love at the coffee shop, his nervousness melted away. They talked for 3 hours. Not the surface-level first date conversation David was used to, but real discussion about things that mattered. Lisa told him about growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other, where her mother had taught her that helping your neighbors wasn't something special. It was just what people did. "I think I learned more about life from watching my mom than from anywhere else," Lisa said over dessert. She never made a big deal about helping people. She just did it. When Mrs. Johnson next door broke her hip, Mom brought her groceries every week until she recovered. When the Peterson family lost their house in a fire, Mom organized the whole neighborhood to help them get back on their feet. David found himself sharing things he rarely talked about. He told Lisa about his failed marriage, about feeling lost and cynical about love. He talked about his grandparents and how their relationship had set a standard he never thought he could find. "I used to think love was about finding someone who made you happy," David said. "But watching you over these past few months, I'm starting to think it might be about finding someone who makes you want to be better." Lisa reached across the table and touched his hand. "I think it's both," she said. "The right person should make you happy and inspire you to grow." "But David, you're already a good person." "I've watched you too, you know. You're patient with difficult clients. You remember details about people's lives. You tip the barista well even when the service is slow. You have kind eyes." Over the following months, their relationship deepened in ways David had never experienced. They didn't just go on dates. They became part of each other's daily lives. Lisa would stop by his office during her lunch breaks, and David would pick her up after particularly difficult shifts at the hospital. David learned that Lisa's kindness wasn't limitless. She had boundaries and expectations. When a coworker tried to take advantage of her generous nature by constantly asking her to cover extra shifts, Lisa firmly but politely declined. When David's ex-wife called wanting to talk through their relationship 6 months after the divorce, Lisa supported his decision not to engage in that conversation. "Being kind doesn't mean being a doormat," Lisa explained. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is say no." David also discovered that Lisa's courage extended beyond helping strangers. When the hospital administration tried to cut nursing staff in the pediatric wing, Lisa organized her colleagues to present a case for why the cuts would harm patient care. She wasn't confrontational, but she was absolutely clear about what was right. "Those kids deserve the best care we can give them," she told David that evening. "If that means making the administrators uncomfortable, so be it." David found himself changing. Not because Lisa asked him to, but because her example made him want to be braver and more generous. He started volunteering at a literacy program for adults, helping people learn to read so they could get better jobs. When his elderly neighbor, Mr. Chen, mentioned struggling with technology, David began stopping by every Sunday to help him video chat with his grandchildren in California. "You're different now," his sister mentioned during a family dinner. "Happier but also more solid somehow." David knew what she meant. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was becoming the person he was meant to be. The moment he knew he wanted to marry Lisa came 8 months into their relationship. They were at the hospital together. David had brought Lisa dinner during a long shift, and they were eating in the pediatric ward's family room. A little boy named Tommy, who was recovering from surgery, couldn't sleep and was crying for his parents, who had gone home to take care of his baby sister. Lisa excused herself and went to Tommy's room. David watched through the doorway as she sat beside the boy's bed, reading him a story in a soft voice. When Tommy asked why his parents had to leave, Lisa patiently explained that sometimes grown-ups had to take care of more than one person at a time, but that didn't mean they loved him any less. "My mom and dad love me even when they're not here?" Tommy asked. "Especially when they're not here," Lisa replied. "That's when love gets to be invisible but still real. Like how the sun is still there even when clouds cover it up." Tommy fell asleep holding Lisa's hand. She stayed there for 20 minutes, making sure he was deeply asleep before carefully tucking his hand under the blanket and returning to David. "Sorry about that," she whispered. "He's been having a hard time." David looked at this woman who gave so naturally of herself, who made complicated things simple for a scared child, who stayed an extra 20 minutes just to make sure a little boy felt safe. He realized that what he felt for her wasn't just love. It was deep, lasting respect for who she was as a human being. 2 weeks later, David went shopping for an engagement ring. Not because he felt pressure or because it seemed like the next logical step, but because he couldn't imagine building a life with anyone else. Lisa had shown him what love looked like when it was grounded in character, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life learning from her example while building something beautiful together. He proposed on a quiet Tuesday morning at their coffee shop. It wasn't planned. He had intended to wait for a more romantic moment. But Lisa was telling him about a little girl who had gotten to go home after a long stay in the hospital, and her face was lit up with joy over this child's recovery. David looked at her happiness over someone else's good news and couldn't wait another day. "Lisa," he said, interrupting her story. Will you marry me? She stopped mid-sentence, eyes wide. David pulled the ring box from his jacket pocket. I know this isn't the most romantic setting, he continued, but this is where I fell in love with you. Not just with you, but with the person you are. Watching you treat every single person with dignity and kindness. Seeing your courage when something matters. Learning how you turn ordinary moments into opportunities to make someone's day better. I want to spend my life trying to love people the way you do. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she said simply. Yes, of course. As David slipped the ring onto her finger, he thought about his grandparents and their 58 years together. He understood now that their lasting love hadn't been built on passion alone, but on daily choices to care for each other and for the people around them. The other customers in the coffee shop applauded when they kissed. The elderly man who Lisa always helped with his change wiped his eyes and said, It's about time, you two. Later that evening, as they called their families with the news, David reflected on how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been cynical about love, convinced that lasting relationships were either fairy tales or settlements for less than what people really wanted. Now he knew better. True love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone whose character you respected so much that you wanted to build a life based on shared values. It was about loving someone not just for how they made you feel, but for who they were when no one was watching. Lisa had taught him that love was both a feeling and a choice. The feeling drew you to someone, but the choice to keep choosing them every day was what made it last. As they planned their wedding, David knew they were building something that would endure not because it was easy, but because it was founded on the solid ground of mutual respect, shared values, and the daily decision to love each other well. His grandmother would have approved.